I would, what strikes me the most about the moment we are going through is the amount of brutality that is unleashed almost everywhere in our planet. Brutality against nature, the environment, brutality against those amongst us who are the most vulnerable, and brutality which is epitomized by the kind of economic system we live in, which is appended by technological developments of a caliber we have never seen before in the history of humanity. So the combination of technological escalation and forms of violence, both archaic and futuristic, that combination has left many people on the pavement. So the question of who counts and who doesn't, and what to do with those we believe do not count, that question has gained attraction. It didn't have, say, 50 years ago.
At the end, just the last bit about, the systemic, kind of like, the institutionalized things that keep us in the type of scenario that we find ourselves in.
So the combination of technological escalation and the brutalization of the weakest amongst ourselves, this seems to me to have raised to a dramatic level the question of who counts and who doesn't, and what to do with those we believe do not count. How do we treat them? How should we, let's say, attend to their needs or not? All of this, it seems to me, has made the period we live in extremely tricky.
There's a beautiful metaphor that has sort of pirouetted into my mind as you were characterizing it in that way. We are in an age where we have never had as much information as we do now, but our consciousness is impoverished. It's akin to having a library of books, but when you open the book themselves, the pages are empty.
Yes, you're absolutely right. The amount of knowledge we possess right now is astounding. The amount of that knowledge that is accessible is also amazing. And yet, the paradox is that the level of ignorance and willful ignorance have never been as high as they are now. It's probably because ignorance is the daughter of irresponsibility and indifference. Ignorance is cultivated as a strategy, both by those who dominate and some of those who are dominated, a strategy to not take responsibility for either oneself or even less so for the state of our world.
Yet what's fascinating is that we haven't abandoned our ability to coalesce and to galvanize around issues that we feel very, very strongly about. And I think that builds into the question around those who have become almost martyrs and figureheads in mass protests that we've seen around the world. People die every day, and they die under really terrible circumstances, whether it is police brutality or assassinations. Yet some deaths have the ability to really galvanize both the community the person was in, the country they live in, and then across the globe. I mean, when we think about what happened with George Floyd, for example, or even before that time, we think of Martin Luther King, Marielle Franco, Adama Traore, and now, as I mentioned, George Floyd. Why are some deaths, especially in a scenario of necropolitics, just not tolerated, where the world says, enough, no more?
Those deaths or those murders, assassinations, talk about George Floyd, he was murdered. His death was not at all accidental. It appears to be an accident, but it's not. Those deaths that tend to speak, by which I mean to be more than just my own death. Those deaths that become, which we experience as the death of more than just the individual who is being put in a grave, are usually deaths that speak to a cause. A cause many recognize themselves in. You mentioned Martin Luther King, Mariela Franco. These were individuals who, during their lifetime, were committed to a cause. And they died as a consequence of their commitment to the cause of justice, in the case of Martin Luther King in particular. And in that sense, he was a martyr of that cause. We spoke well beyond himself, his family, America. It spoke to the world at large. George Floyd's death is of a different type. It happens as the result of the workings of a system that has been there for a long time, that pretends to be invisible, and yet we see its results in terms of the lives that it's breaking. Not every single kind of life, but the life of black people. So Floyd is the victim of the war that has been waged against black people. I would say worldwide, but in particular in those societies that underwent the experience of slavery and colonialism. And his death spoke to the world at large because it was a scandal to common sense.
Is it more amplified because we can see ourselves represented in that story?
Definitely we can see ourselves being put to death during those 8 minutes and a number of seconds during which he is pleading for mercy. And all that he is getting as a response is more cruelty. And that's why I say it's something that a scandal against common sense, against the very idea of what it means to be human, which means to respond to a plea that is addressed to us and do something about it.